The journey into the unknown began like most others, on a routine mission, filled with the mundane tasks of space travel and research. The crew of Eon, a deep space exploration vessel, had no idea that they were about to unlock the greatest mystery humanity had ever encountered. Their objective was simple: chart unexplored sectors of the galaxy and gather data on any new star systems that might harbor life. But when they stumbled upon the remnants of a star system destroyed by something entirely unnatural, everything changed. Commander Elara Nunez stared out at the stars, her eyes narrowed in focus. What happened here? She muttered to herself, her voice betraying a mix of curiosity and caution. The star system they had found was unlike anything recorded in the logs of human space exploration. The planets that once orbited the massive star were gone. Nothing but void remained in their place, a blackened hole where life and energy had once thrived. The Eon drifted silently among the wreckage, its sensors searching for anything that might explain the destruction. But it was not the debris or the absence of life that held Elara's attention. It was the faint anomaly buried deep within the dead star's core. "Elara, you're going to want to see this," called Dr. Julian Hale from the ship's research deck. Elara made her way to the lab, finding Hale hunched over his console, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the data screen. His fingers danced over the holographic interface, tracing out patterns that were far from natural. "Whatever this is, it's not a normal phenomenon," Hale continued, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Look at these readings. This isn't just a collapse of a star system. There's something manipulating the energy fields here." "Manipulating?" Elara's brow furrowed. "By whom?" "That's what I don't understand," Hale said, tapping his screen again. The image zoomed in on a pulse of energy emanating from the star's former core, now a chaotic, swirling mass of light and dark. The pulse was too structured, too regular to be a natural occurrence. It's as if someone, or something, was sculpting this galaxy, twisting and bending the very fabric of space to create, well, something. Before Elara could respond, the ship's AI, Orin, interrupted. "Commander, I have detected a residual signal, faint but consistent. It appears to be originating from within the anomaly. Can you triangulate its source?" Elara asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. Orin processed the request, and in moments, a map of the sector appeared on the screen, pinpointing a location within the dead star's core. "I've sent the coordinates to your console," Orin responded. Elara took a deep breath. This was no ordinary discovery. It felt like a warning, a call to investigate the unknown, but it also carried an undercurrent of danger. A voice at the back of her mind told her to turn back, but another part of her, something more primal, told her they were about to uncover something far greater than any of them could ever anticipate. With a grim nod, Elara turned to Hale. "Prepare an expedition. We're going in." Hours later, Elara and a small crew of scientists, engineers, and security personnel descended into the wreckage of the system. They navigated the remnants of shattered planets, their ship's hull groaning under the strain of navigating the collapsing systems. The ship was stable for now, but they all knew it was a race against time. The energy pulses were growing stronger, the anomaly expanding, as though something was drawing them in. As they neared the center of the star's collapse, the anomaly's signal intensified. It wasn't just energy anymore. It was a presence, a force that tugged at the edges of their minds, whispering in languages no human had ever known. And then, in the heart of the dead system, they saw it. A structure, a monument, hovering in the void. Its form was unlike anything created by any known civilization. Tall, sleek, and intricate, the shape seemed to distort the very fabric of space around it. As they approached, the ship's sensors scrambled to make sense of the data flooding in. The monument pulsed, as if alive, its surface shifting and rearranging, reflecting the energy that was now suffusing the dead system. "It's beautiful," whispered Dr. Maya Solis, a xenobiologist, her voice tinged with awe. She was the first to notice the patterns moving across the structure, interlocking symbols that seemed to communicate in a language beyond human comprehension. Is it a message? Elara asked, eyes locked on the monument. What is it trying to tell us? The air inside the ship grew thick, charged with static, as though the very molecules around them were being altered by the presence of the monument. The pulse intensified, and then, suddenly, a voice, a low, resonant hum, filled the cabin. It was incomprehensible, but somehow, the meaning was clear. You are not the first. A chill ran down Elara's spine as the voice seemed to reach directly into her mind. It was not speaking to them, but through them, weaving itself into the very fabric of their consciousness. What does it mean? Hale asked, his voice shaky. Before anyone could respond, the ship shuddered violently, the lights flickering. Oren's voice cut through the chaos. Captain, the gravitational field is destabilizing. We must leave, now. But it was too late. The force around them amplified, pulling the Eon toward the monument. The stars themselves seemed to warp and bend, creating a vortex of energy. The crew fought to maintain control, but the ship was pulled in, spiraling helplessly toward the epicenter of the anomaly. And then, everything went black. When Elara awoke, it was to silence. The ship had stopped moving. The faint hum of the ship's systems was the only sound in the darkened cabin. She sat up, her body sore, disoriented. Around her, the crew stirred, equally confused. What happened? Hale groaned, sitting up from the floor. Where are we? Solis asked, looking out the window, her face pale. Elara slowly stood, her hand gripping the edge of her seat for support. She gazed out into the space beyond, her breath catching in her throat. They were no longer in the collapsing star system. The stars around them were different, familiar, yet somehow, altered. They had crossed into a new region of space entirely. And within the depths of the void, something ancient watched them. Something that had been waiting. Get ready, Elara said, her voice steady but filled with an unspoken fear. We're not just in a different part of space. We've been pulled into something bigger. And in that moment, they all knew it. They had become pawns in a game much larger than themselves. A game played by the architects. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as the crew of the Eon sat motionless, staring into the vastness of space. Something had shifted in the very nature of the universe around them. They were no longer within the confines of the galaxy they knew, no longer within any charted space at all. They had been taken, moved to a place beyond their understanding. Elara stood before the main console, her eyes scanning the readings that Oren was displaying. The data was coming in fast, but it made no sense. The physics of this place defied everything they knew. Oren, give me a status report, Elara demanded, her voice sharp with authority. She needed to regain control of the situation. Oren's synthesized voice filled the bridge. Commander, we are currently located within a completely unknown sector of space. The stars here are unfamiliar, and the fundamental forces, gravity, time, light, are behaving inconsistently with known laws of physics. I am unable to pinpoint our location with any degree of certainty. Great, Elara muttered under her breath. Anything else? There are also indications of energy patterns. Strong, repeating pulses emanating from a source located several light years away. It's not unlike the signal we detected earlier, but much more concentrated. Elara turned to the crew gathered behind her. We need to investigate that signal, she said, her tone resolute. If we're going to figure out where we are and what happened, that's our best shot. Shouldn't we be focusing on getting back home? Hale asked, his voice tense. We don't even know where home is anymore. If we can't even pinpoint our own location, we can't go back if we don't understand what we're dealing with first, Elara interrupted. She glanced over at the rest of the crew. We have to learn about this place, and about what pulled us here. We can't afford to leave without answers. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but no one argued. They were explorers, after all, and in the face of the unknown, curiosity had always outweighed fear. Hours later, the Eon was moving toward the origin of the signal. The journey was tense, each member of the crew lost in their own thoughts as they drifted through this strange and uncharted expanse of space. There were no stars in sight, no nearby systems, only the constant hum of the ship and the eerie feeling that they were being watched. Dr. Maya Solis stood next to Elara in the bridge's observation deck, her eyes wide as she looked out at the empty void. "Elara," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "do you think this could be some sort of test? A study of us? A way to see how humanity will react to whatever it is that's happening?" "I don't know," Elara replied, her gaze fixed on the unknown ahead. "But I don't like the feeling that we're being manipulated. We're not in control here." As they neared the source of the signal, the energy patterns became more pronounced, and the ship's systems began to pick up strange readings. The ship's lights flickered, and the hum of the engines shifted in pitch, almost as though it, too, was responding to the strange forces surrounding them. Suddenly, the pulse grew stronger, far stronger than before, and the ship lurched violently. The crew scrambled to keep their footing as a massive energy field seemed to explode outward, engulfing the ship. "Hold on," Elara shouted, grabbing the console for stability. The lights flashed bright, and for a moment, the crew was bathed in a blinding light. Then, as quickly as it had come, the turbulence ceased. The ship was still. The light was gone. "Report," Elara barked, struggling to regain control. Orin's voice, shaken but functional, answered. "Commander, we are no longer moving. The ship is in a stasis field. All systems are locked in place. I am unable to override it." "What do you mean, locked in place?" Hale asked, panic creeping into his voice. "We're stuck?" "Not exactly," Orin replied. "The ship has been surrounded by an energy field. I'm detecting large-scale interference, but there is a structure nearby that is generating this field." Elara's heart raced as she looked out the window. She could see it now, what had been invisible before. A massive, angular construct, floating silently in the blackness. It was unlike any known structure, its surface sleek and smooth, the edges sharp and geometrically perfect. It seemed to shimmer in the darkness, as though it were made from some substance not found in any human database. Before she could speak, a voice boomed in her mind, so powerful that it reverberated through her entire being. "You have come. You are the latest to arrive. We have watched you." Elara stumbled back, gripping her head as the words crashed into her consciousness. It wasn't just a voice, it was a presence that filled every corner of her mind. She wasn't alone in this space. They, whatever they were watching. The crew gasped, some of them clutching their heads in pain, while others trembled. It was as though the very fabric of their minds was being probed, tested. "Who are you?" Elara demanded, her voice trembling but firm. "What do you want from us?" The voice responded again, this time more slowly, more deliberately, as if savoring her confusion and fear. "We are the architects. You are part of our design. You will serve as a test, an experiment. We have shaped this galaxy, each piece, each life, each star. And now, we watch. You will evolve according to our will." Elara felt a cold sweat break out on her skin. The crew was silent, paralyzed with fear or awe. The architect's words settled heavily in the air, their meaning both simple and terrifying. "You will choose to remain the same, or to become more. We will test you." The voice faded, leaving a deep, resonating silence in its wake. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. What does that mean?" Solis finally whispered, her voice barely audible. Elara turned toward the crew, her thoughts racing. "I don't know," she said, her heart pounding. "But we're not just in the middle of a galactic mystery. We're in the middle of an experiment, and I think it's our evolution that's being tested. We need to figure out how to fight back," Hale said, clenching his fists. "We can't just let them control us. We don't know what they want," Elara replied, her voice strained. "But we're going to find out. And we'll do whatever it takes to get answers." As the ship remained locked in place, surrounded by the enigmatic architect's presence, the crew knew one thing for certain. They had been thrust into a game they never agreed to play, and it was a game where survival, and perhaps even their very existence, depended on their ability to understand the forces shaping their fate. And the game was just beginning. The energy field around the Eon held them in place, its unnatural stillness pressing down on them like a heavy weight. Even after the voice of the architects faded, the presence lingered, like a shadow cast over their minds, impossible to shake. Elara stood at the center of the bridge, her eyes scanning the readouts, her mind racing with questions. The crew sat in tense silence, each of them processing the gravity of what had just transpired. "What now?" Hale finally asked, breaking the quiet. Elara didn't look at him right away. Instead, she reached for her comms and spoke to Orin. "Can you find a way to break through this field? Anything?" Orin's synthesized voice came back through the speaker, strained. "The field is unlike anything in the ship's database, Commander. I cannot find a way to bypass it. It appears to be both blocking and manipulating our systems in real time. I cannot override it." "Great," Hale muttered, sinking into his chair in frustration. But Elara had an idea, though it wasn't one she liked. "We need to understand this field," she said, her voice resolute. "We need to learn what it is and how to interact with it." "I think I know someone who might have an idea," Dr. Maya Solis said quietly, her eyes narrowing as she spoke. She was standing near one of the observation windows, her gaze distant. "I've been thinking about what the architects said. We are part of their design, their experiment. What if this isn't just about controlling our ship? What if it's also about controlling us?" Elara's eyes locked onto her. "What are you suggesting?" Solis swallowed hard. "What if the architects aren't just testing our physical abilities? They retesting something deeper. Our minds, our consciousness, our very evolution. What if this field is part of a larger experiment to manipulate our thoughts, our decisions?" The idea hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. "Then we're not just trapped," Hale said grimly, "we're lab rats. They reshaping us. And we might not even know how." "I think that's exactly it," Solis replied, her voice trembling with realization. "This is a test of our free will. They want to see how we respond, how we adapt. The choice they gave us, it's not just about surviving this. It's about how we evolve in response to their manipulation." Elara's mind churned as she processed this new theory. If the architects were shaping not only the stars and planets, but also the very evolution of life, what if humanity was just another experiment in a long series of cosmic tests? What if the choices they were being forced to make weren't their own at all? "I think you're right," Elara finally said, her voice darkening. "We're being tested on a level we never imagined. We've got to find a way to break free from their influence," Hale insisted. "We need to prove we can control our fate, not let them do it for us." Solis nodded, her eyes flashing with determination. "But we need more information. If this is an experiment, then we need to understand the rules, how they're controlling us. We need to learn what they want, what they've done to this galaxy, and how they expect us to respond." Elara turned to the controls. "Orin, get us as close as possible to that structure. We're going in." The Eon moved slowly, pulled by the strange energy field toward the massive, shimmering construct that loomed in the distance. It seemed to beckon them, as though the structure itself was alive, responding to their presence, and perhaps even guiding them. Its surface rippled with subtle, shifting patterns, an unsettling, fluid motion that was both beautiful and disorienting. "Commander," Orin said, his voice suddenly tinged with urgency, "I'm detecting activity within the structure. There are fluctuations in the energy fields. It's as though something is awakening." Elara's heart raced. The architects were watching them again, perhaps even pulling the strings from within the structure. "Prepare for landing," she said, her voice tight. "We don't know what we're walking into, but we need to see what's inside." The crew gathered in the ship's airlock, each of them suited in the heavy, gravity-resistant suits that would allow them to survive in the unknown environment they were about to enter. The air was thick with tension. They didn't know what they would find inside the structure, or if they would even survive the encounter. Elara stood at the front, her face grim as she looked at her team. Remember, we have no idea what this place is, or how the architects are connected to it. But we need answers. We need to understand who, what they are, and why they've been toying with our galaxy. No matter what happens, we stay together. They nodded, their faces determined, though the fear in their eyes was impossible to ignore. One by one, they filed into the airlock, and with a deep breath, Elara gave the signal to open the hatch. The airlock hissed open, and they stepped out into a strange, alien world. The interior of the structure was vast, far larger than the outside appearance suggested. The walls stretched impossibly high, made of a smooth, black material that shimmered in the low light. It felt like walking through the remnants of an ancient temple, though there was no obvious sign of civilization. No statues, no markings, no history to indicate that any beings had ever lived here. The only thing that felt alive was the structure itself, pulsating and shifting in response to their movements. "Where are we?" Solis asked, her voice soft with awe. Elara shook her head. "I don't know, but we're about to find out." The group moved deeper into the heart of the structure, following a series of faint, glowing lines on the floor, patterns that seemed to guide them toward a central chamber. As they neared, they felt the air grow colder, the pressure building as though they were crossing some invisible threshold. The room ahead opened up into a vast, circular space. At its center stood a massive stone platform, surrounded by intricate, glowing symbols etched into the floor. The symbols were too complex to decipher immediately, but there was an unmistakable sense of purpose in the way they were arranged. They were meant to communicate something. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The symbols on the floor began to glow brighter, and the platform at the center began to hum with energy. A deep voice filled the air, resonating with power. "You seek answers. You seek freedom, but you will find only what you are ready to understand." Elara's pulse quickened. The architects were speaking again. But this time, there was something different in their tone. It was not the detached observation of before. Now, it was more like a warning. The symbols around the platform shifted, rearranging into new patterns, patterns that seemed to be alive, growing and changing in ways that made Elara's head spin. The air grew thick with energy, and she felt the presence of the architects pressing down on them, watching their every move. "We need to be careful," Solis whispered, eyes wide with fear. But Elara didn't respond. She was too focused on the glowing symbols. They were changing again, faster now, and the platform at the center of the room was beginning to hum louder, sending vibrations through the floor. Then, with a sudden, shocking clarity, Elara realized something. What she had thought was a warning was actually a test. The architects were not just watching them anymore. They were pushing them, and what came next would determine the fate of humanity. She stepped forward, feeling the pressure build in her chest. "We're not their pawns," she said, her voice firm, but tinged with uncertainty. "We will choose our own path." But as she spoke those words, the symbols shifted again, and a sudden burst of light filled the room. The burst of light came without warning, so intense it blinded them all. Elara's heart raced as her vision went white, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to disappear. For a few disorienting moments, there was nothing but a searing emptiness, a vast and overwhelming silence that threatened to consume her. Then, just as abruptly, the light faded. Elara blinked rapidly, her eyes struggling to adjust. The space around her had changed. The massive chamber they had been standing in was gone. Instead, she found herself in a strange, shifting landscape, one unlike anything she had ever seen before. The ground beneath her feet was solid but shimmered as though it were made of liquid glass. The sky above was dark, filled with swirling, ethereal patterns that seemed to twist and bend, as though the very fabric of space itself was in flux. Strange, unidentifiable shapes moved across the horizon, their outlines flickering in and out of existence, like shadows on a distant stage. Her breath caught in her throat. Something was very wrong. This wasn't just another part of the structure. This place, it was alive. "Where are we?" Solis whispered, her voice tinged with fear. The others were looking around just as bewildered, their expressions a mix of awe and terror. I don't know, Elara said, her voice tight. But we're not in control anymore. This place, it's changing us. Hale stepped forward, his eyes wide, his hand gripping his weapon. This is it, isn't it? The architects are testing us. This is part of their experiment. Before Elara could respond, a voice filled the air once again, its deep resonance filling their minds and shaking them to their core. You have entered the domain of the architects. This place is not bound by time, space, or logic as you know them. Here, you will face what lies within. The choices you make here will shape your future, your evolution, and the future of all your kind. The voice reverberated in Elara's mind, not just a sound but a presence that seemed to tug at her very soul. There was no mistaking it. The architects were in control of this reality, manipulating the world around them as if it were nothing more than a simulation. We're trapped, Hale said, his voice grim. They've put us in some kind of test, and we have no idea what the stakes are. They've already told us, Solis replied, her voice trembling. It's our evolution, how we respond to this place, to their manipulation. They want to see how we choose. But choose what? Elara's gaze moved over the strange landscape, her mind racing. There was something familiar about this place, something unsettlingly intimate. It wasn't just an alien environment. It was a reflection of their own thoughts, their own subconscious fears and desires. It was as though the architects weren't just testing their physical capabilities, but their very sense of identity. A tremor ran through her as she realized the truth. They weren't just being tested, they were being transformed. The ground beneath her feet began to shift, cracks appearing in the glass-like surface. From those cracks, tendrils of light began to rise, spiraling into the air. The shapes on the horizon grew closer, their flickering forms resolving into something more tangible, strange, monstrous figures that seemed to be made from the same glowing energy as the light tendrils. Are those the architects? Solis asked, her voice shaking. I don't think so, Elara replied, her eyes narrowing. These creatures, they're something else. They're part of the test. The figures advanced, their bodies shimmering and distorting as they moved. They didn't walk. They glided, floating through the strange landscape with unnatural grace. Their eyes, or what passed for eyes, were pools of dark energy, endless and empty. Suddenly, the voice of the architects boomed through the air once again, this time with a deeper, more commanding tone. You will face your trial. To evolve, you must first face the darkness within you. Only then can you choose your path. At the words, darkness within, Elara felt a jolt of understanding, a cold rush of fear. This was no mere test of physical endurance. This was a test of their deepest selves, their hidden desires, fears, and flaws. The ground shifted violently, and the sky above seemed to crack open. A new presence emerged from the rift, a shape formed from shadows and light. It was formless at first, but soon it coalesced into something more human, something that looked eerily like Elara herself. But it wasn't her. The figure that stood before her was a distorted version of herself, its features twisted into something monstrous. The air around it crackled with dark energy, and its eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity. You, the figure rasped, its voice a distorted echo of Elara's own. You are the one who will lead them to their doom. Elara's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, her mind reeling. This thing. It was a reflection of her own darkest thoughts, the version of herself she feared becoming. The voice inside her head screamed, urging her to confront it, to fight it. But something deep within her resisted. Was this truly her? Was this what she was capable of becoming? Or was it simply an illusion, a creation of the architects designed to make her doubt herself? As if sensing her hesitation, the shadow figure reached out, its hand stretching toward her with inhuman speed. The air around it grew cold, suffocating. You fear what you could become, it hissed. You fear what lies within you. You fear the choices you will make when you are faced with the truth. But the truth is simple. You cannot escape who you are. A bolt of panic surged through Elara. She had to fight back. She had to reject this dark version of herself, or else the architects would have won. No, she whispered, her voice shaking with defiance. I am not you. The moment she spoke those words, the shadow figure recoiled, its body warping and flickering, as though her refusal had destabilized its form. It let out a high-pitched scream, its body dissipating into a cloud of dark energy before vanishing into the air. The tendrils of light that had risen from the cracks in the ground slowly withdrew, returning to the earth, leaving only silence in their wake. The strange landscape around them began to shift again, the surreal environment changing rapidly. Elara could feel the architects watching, the presence of their influence heavy in the air. The voice of the architects spoke once more, this time softer, almost reflective. You have made your first choice, but it is only the beginning. The ground beneath their feet began to solidify, the cracks in the landscape disappearing as the world around them reformed into a new shape. The sky cleared, revealing distant stars, familiar, yet somehow alien. We've passed the first trial, Elara said quietly, turning to the others. But this is only the start. The architects are testing us, not just in our choices, but in our very nature. We've only just begun to understand what they're really doing to us. Solis stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. What will they do next? Elara looked into the now clear sky, feeling the weight of the architect's gaze upon them. I don't know, but we have to be ready. We have to make sure we don't lose ourselves in this. Whatever they throw at us next, we have to stand firm. We must choose our path, no matter how difficult it becomes. The world around them seemed to shift once more, as though the next trial was already beginning. And with it, the understanding that their choices, their evolution, and their very survival were all now in the hands of the architects. The fate of humanity rested on their ability to withstand the darkness, both within themselves and the universe around them. And they were far from finished. Elara stood still, feeling the weight of her decision pulse through her veins like a quiet drumbeat. The false version of herself had disappeared into the shifting sky, but the echo of its presence remained, lodged deep in her mind. What was it, really? A manifestation of her darkest fears? Or something more? Something sentient, made by the architects to force her into a corner, to see if she would break under pressure? And what of the others? What about the choices they would make? Elara turned her attention back to her crew. They were all standing in a loose circle, their expressions a mix of wariness and resolve. Are we all okay? She asked, her voice breaking the heavy silence. Hale looked shaken, his face pale but determined. That thing, it wasn't just an illusion. It was real, in a way. I could feel it clawing at my mind. I felt it too, Solis admitted, her voice quieter than usual. It was like something was trying to take hold of me, drag me into the darkness. I don't know how I fought it. We fought it because we chose not to become what it showed us, Elara said firmly. Each of us made a choice. We didn't let the architects control us. But that was just one trial, Hale pointed out, his eyes still scanning the strange, ethereal sky. Who knows what else they have planned for us? Elara glanced around. The landscape had shifted again, this time forming into jagged mountains that rose high into the sky, the air crackling with energy. There was a sense of claustrophobia here, as though the walls of reality were closing in on them. The architecture of the place felt alive, like the entire environment was an organism, breathing with a purpose, watching them. The voice of the architects echoed through the air, louder this time, filling every corner of their consciousness. You have faced the first trial, but your journey is not yet complete. You have passed the test of the self, but now you will be tested in another way. Elara clenched her fists, ready for whatever came next. The test of the self had been agonizing, but this was different. She could feel it in the air, in the way the ground vibrated beneath her boots. The architects were shifting the very nature of their trial, moving from psychological manipulation to something more tangible. You will face your greatest fear. The fear of loss, of fragmentation. This is the final test before you can choose your future. Fail, and you will be lost. The words rang out with finality, echoing through their minds, and for a moment, Elara's heart skipped a beat. The fear of loss, of fragmentation. What did that mean? Suddenly, the landscape around them began to twist. The mountains fractured, splitting apart like shattered glass. The sky split open, revealing deep, dark voids where the stars used to be. From those voids, strange, shifting tendrils of energy began to emerge, twisting and coiling like serpents. Elara's breath caught in her throat. The very fabric of this place was coming apart. "Get ready," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "We don't know what this trial is going to look like, but we have to stick together. Stay focused. Do not let this place tear us apart." Solis nodded, but there was a hint of fear in her eyes. "I've seen this before," she said, her voice strained. "When a mind is broken, when the walls of reality collapse like this, it can fracture someone's soul. This is a test of who we are. If we aren't careful, we'll lose ourselves." Elara swallowed hard. Could they really withstand whatever was coming? Could they hold on to their sanity, their identity, when everything they knew was being twisted beyond recognition? Before anyone could respond, the environment around them shattered completely. The ground beneath their feet collapsed, and they were all suddenly falling into an endless abyss. Elara's stomach lurched as the sensation of free fall took hold of her. She tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness, leaving only the crushing pressure in her chest. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the falling stopped. They were no longer in free fall. They were standing in a new, disturbing landscape. The ground was smooth and black, as though they were standing on the surface of a distant, lifeless planet. The air was thick and heavy, and the sky was filled with strange, flickering lights that pulsed in erratic patterns. And then, they appeared. Elara glanced around. The landscape had shifted again, this time forming into jagged mountains that rose high into the sky, the air crackling with energy. There was a sense of claustrophobia here, as though the walls of reality were closing in on them. The architecture of the place felt alive, like the entire environment was an organism, breathing with a purpose, watching them. The voice of the architects echoed through the air, louder this time, filling every corner of their consciousness. "You have faced the first trial, but your journey is not yet complete. You have passed the test of the self, but now you will be tested in another way." Elara clenched her fists, ready for whatever came next. The test of the self had been agonizing, but this was different. She could feel it in the air, in the way the ground vibrated beneath her boots. The architects were shifting the very nature of their trial, moving from psychological manipulation to something more tangible. "You will face your greatest fear, the fear of loss, of fragmentation. This is the final test before you can choose your future. Fail, and you will be lost." The words rang out with finality, echoing through their minds, and for a moment, Elara's heart skipped a beat. The fear of loss, of fragmentation. What did that mean? Suddenly, the landscape around them began to twist. The mountains fractured, splitting apart like shattered glass. The sky split open, revealing deep, dark voids where the stars used to be. From those voids, strange, shifting tendrils of energy began to emerge, twisting and coiling like serpents. Elara's breath caught in her throat. The very fabric of this place was coming apart. "Get ready," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "We don't know what this trial is going to look like, but we have to stick together. Stay focused. Do not let this place tear us apart." Solis nodded, but there was a hint of fear in her eyes. "I've seen this before," she said, her voice strained. "When a mind is broken, when the walls of reality collapse like this, it can fracture someone's soul. This is a test of who we are. If we aren't careful, we'll lose ourselves." Elara swallowed hard. Could they really withstand whatever was coming? Could they hold on to their sanity, their identity, when everything they knew was being twisted beyond recognition? Before anyone could respond, the environment around them shattered completely. The ground beneath their feet collapsed, and they were all suddenly falling into an endless abyss. Elara's stomach lurched as the sensation of free fall took hold of her. She tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness, leaving only the crushing pressure in her chest. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the falling stopped. They were no longer in free fall. They were standing in a new, disturbing landscape. The ground was smooth and black, as though they were standing on the surface of a distant, lifeless planet. The air was thick and heavy, and the sky was filled with strange, flickering lights that pulsed in erratic patterns. And then, they appeared. The words of the architects echoed in Elara's mind long after their trial had ended. The fate of your kind, and your own fate, remains uncertain. They weren't just empty threats. It was a warning, a reminder that despite everything they had endured, there was still so much more to face. Elara's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one question stood above the rest. What did the architects want from them? She had seen how they had twisted reality, creating trials that dug deep into their fears, testing their very will to survive. But that was just it. Each trial wasn't simply about overcoming obstacles. It was about shaping them, bending them to some hidden purpose. But what was that purpose? The others gathered around her as the shifting landscape calmed into an unsettling stillness. The mountains that had risen and fallen seemed to settle into an endless horizon of jagged peaks. The air was cold and thin, and the once vibrant stars above them now flickered like dying embers. We passed, Hale said, his voice hoarse. But what did we pass into? Solis stepped forward. Her eyes narrowed, her hands shaking slightly from the residual fear they had all just faced. I don't know, but we're not out of it yet. These trials, these tests, they're not just about us, are they? They're about everything. The architects are shaping more than just us. They're shaping history. Our history. Elara's heart tightened. Solis was right. They had begun to realize the deeper, more terrifying truth. They weren't just pawns in an experiment. They were a piece in a much larger puzzle. A puzzle that spanned entire galaxies and eons of time. The architects had not merely been testing their personal fears or desires. They were orchestrating the entire evolution of humanity, and perhaps other species as well. All of it was part of some grand cosmic design, one that they couldn't yet fully comprehend. This is bigger than us, Hale muttered, his eyes haunted. We're nothing more than fragments in their experiment. They're playing with the fabric of reality itself. Elara's thoughts echoed Hale's words. The architects had already shown their ability to manipulate entire systems, to engineer life in ways they couldn't even begin to understand. The galaxies themselves were their canvas, the stars their brushstrokes. They had created life, and now they were testing the results, seeing which civilizations would evolve as intended and which would fail. And humanity, they were a part of that grand experiment. Where do we go from here? Solis asked, her voice quiet but filled with determination. What are we supposed to do now? Elara took a deep breath, her mind racing. She felt the weight of their journey pressing down on her, but something else had begun to surface as well, clarity. The trials of the self and of fear, were tests of their inner strength. But now, it was time to make a real choice. It wasn't just about surviving the architects' whims anymore. It was about taking control of their own fate. We don't let them dictate our future, Elara said, her voice steady but strong. We push back. We're not just going to let them shape us into whatever they want. We've survived their trials, but now it's time to find out what's really at stake. Hale nodded slowly, but his eyes were distant. You're right, but how? How do we fight something that can bend entire galaxies at will? Elara's gaze hardened. We start by understanding what they want from us, why they've chosen us. We need to get inside their minds, figure out what their true plan is. And then, we stop it. Solis crossed her arms, her eyes scanning the desolate landscape. And how do we do that? We've barely survived their tests so far. They could crush us in an instant if they wanted to. We find their weakness, Elara said, a spark of resolve igniting in her chest. Every power, no matter how vast, has a weakness. The architects are gods in their own right, but they're not invincible. We have to find their core, the part of them that makes them vulnerable, and use that against them. The group fell into a tense silence. The air around them seemed to thrum with the echo of the architect's presence, but there was something else, something more tangible in the silence that surrounded them. It felt like the calm before the storm, as though the very fabric of their reality was being prepared for something more. Suddenly, a low hum reverberated through the ground beneath them. It was subtle at first, like a vibration in the distance, but it quickly grew louder, more insistent, until the entire landscape seemed to resonate with it. Elara's body stiffened, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. "It's them," Solis whispered, her voice shaking. "They're watching us." The vibration turned into a tremor, and the sky above them darkened, flickering with an unnatural storm. The ground cracked open once again, and from the fissures, tendrils of bright, living light began to emerge, coiling and twisting like serpents, drawing power from the fabric of reality itself. A figure materialized from the swirling light, a being so vast and unknowable that it seemed to defy comprehension. Its shape flickered, constantly shifting between forms, each one more alien and incomprehensible than the last. The air around it hummed with energy, crackling like the storm before a cataclysm. "We have been waiting for you," a voice boomed, not through sound but directly in their minds. It was deep, ancient, and filled with an unsettling calm. "You have passed the trials, but now comes the final test. You will either ascend or be extinguished. You have no choice." Elara felt the weight of the voice press down on her, threatening to crush her spirit. "We have no choice?" She clenched her fists, refusing to succumb to the overwhelming presence. This was the architects, their final offer. "Why?" Elara found herself demanding, her voice trembling but defiant. "Why us? Why humanity?" The being's form shifted again, this time taking on the appearance of a vast, ethereal figure, a silhouette of a humanoid figure that seemed to embody the stars themselves. "You are the experiment. You are the variable. You have been chosen because you are the one that could change the future of the universe. But the outcome is still uncertain. Your evolution, your choices, will determine whether the fate of your kind, and all others, will be one of creation or annihilation." Elara's heart beat faster. This was it. The architects weren't just testing them. They were offering them something. A choice, a power beyond anything she had ever imagined. "Choose," the voice of the architects echoed. "Choose your destiny. Ascend or perish." The being extended its hand, and before them appeared two paths. One path glowed with radiant light, filled with possibilities and promise, but it felt too perfect, too controlled. The other path was dark, chaotic, filled with swirling maelstroms of energy and destruction, but it felt free, untamed. Elara stared at the two paths, each one beckoning them toward a different fate. But the question remained: which path was the right one? And more importantly, was there even a right one at all? The choice was theirs, and yet, it felt like it had always been in the hands of the architects all along. The two paths before them shimmered in the tense silence, each one holding its own promise and peril. The radiant path gleamed with perfect symmetry, its light pristine and alluring. It whispered of peace, of order, of a future without struggle, but the perfection felt stifling, like a cage disguised as paradise. The dark path twisted with violent energy, chaotic and unpredictable, but there was something deeply freeing about it, something untamable. Elara's heart pounded as she stepped closer to the two paths. The architect's presence was overwhelming, pressing on her mind, whispering promises of power and transcendence. Yet, despite the grandeur of their offer, Elara couldn't shake the sense that this was yet another test, another manipulation. Was there a true choice? Solis stepped forward, her eyes scanning the glowing paths. What if they're both traps? What if the architects are forcing us into a corner, making us choose between two sides of the same coin? Hale, ever the pragmatist, clenched his fists. "If we don't choose, we'll be destroyed." They said it themselves. Ascend or perish. But Elara shook her head. I don't believe that. There's something more. We've been manipulated at every turn, but they've never given us the full truth. Not yet. The architects want us to think this is the end of the line, that this is where our destiny is written for us. But I don't think they can see us, not completely. She turned to face the figure before them, its ever-shifting form shimmering in the storm of energy that surrounded them. You want us to choose, Elara said, her voice firm and defiant. But why? Why give us the illusion of choice when you've been controlling everything this entire time? The being's shape flickered, as though considering her question. It radiated an almost infinite intelligence, yet there was something disturbing about its calm. You misunderstand, the voice intoned, a ripple of static distorting the air. This is not an illusion. This is the choice. You are the last experiment, the culmination of millennia of trial and error, the final piece to our design. So Lisa's voice shook as she spoke. So, we're just pawns. Our lives, our fate, it's all been decided before we even got here? Your species was chosen, the being answered, the words like a cold wind. Humanity has always been the most unpredictable of all. From the moment you first evolved, we saw potential in you, the ability to shape the future in ways no other species could. But potential alone is not enough. You must choose your path, whether to rise to the challenges we have placed before you, to evolve into something greater, or to remain fragile. The choice is yours to make, but it has already been written in the stars. The implication hit Elara like a physical blow. The architects had engineered humanity from the very beginning, not just as a test of evolution, but as an experiment to see if their unpredictable, chaotic nature could rise to the ultimate challenge. If humanity chose the light, they would become part of the architect's vision, perfect, controlled, predictable. If they chose the dark, they would embrace chaos, freedom, but with the inherent risk of self-destruction. But what if neither path was the answer? Elara's mind raced. A strange sensation washed over her. The ground beneath her feet began to ripple, distorting, the very fabric of the landscape unraveling, as though their reality was a thin veil being peeled away. The sky above began to fracture, revealing the vast expanse of a galaxy far beyond the one they knew. One filled with hundreds, thousands of worlds, all connected by a delicate thread of fate. Look, Hale whispered, pointing into the rift. What is that? What's happening? The rift opened wider, revealing a glimpse of something deeper, something ancient and beyond comprehension. Elara felt the overwhelming presence of the architects, but now, there was something else. A force, something primal, untouched by the architects' influence. It was a space beyond their reach, a place where their manipulations couldn't penetrate. It was real freedom, the real choice, Elara realized. The architects had been manipulating them, but this was something they couldn't see, couldn't control. There was a third path, a path that had nothing to do with their trials, their experiments, their design. The realization struck her like a lightning bolt. Humanity was more than just a tool in the architects' grand experiment. The architects had underestimated humanity's greatest strength, choice. Elara stepped forward, away from the paths they had been given. No, she said, her voice steady but filled with raw conviction. This isn't the end. This isn't the only choice we have. We won't follow your designs anymore. We won't choose between your light and your dark. We will carve our own path, free from your control. The figure before them faltered, its form flickering and warping as if struggling to understand what Elara was saying. You cannot defy us, it intoned, a tremor of uncertainty lacing its voice. You are part of the experiment. You cannot escape the path we have set for you. We're not your experiment, Elara declared, taking another step forward. You may have shaped our evolution, but you can't shape our will. We choose. The ground beneath her feet shook violently, and the fabric of reality around them began to unravel in earnest. The architects' hold on the universe cracked, their influence waning as Elara's defiance reverberated through the very core of the galaxy. The sky above them shattered completely, revealing a vast and limitless expanse of stars, a cosmic ocean with no boundaries, no rules, no manipulations. The stars blinked, a new, untold future unfolding before them. The architect's presence began to waver, their once unyielding power cracking under the weight of humanity's defiance. For the first time, Elara felt truly free, not just as an individual, but as part of something larger, a collective will that reached beyond the architect's grasp. You choose? The voice of the architects wavered, no longer the commanding force it once was. It sounded almost fragile. You are the uncalculated variable. You will bring destruction. You will bring chaos. No, Elara said quietly, her voice calm and steady. We will bring creation. We will bring a future of our own making, not yours. And with those words, the cosmic storm that had raged around them began to settle, the energy shifting into something new, something unprecedented. The universe, the galaxy, the stars, everything, was no longer bound by the architect's designs. It was free. The architects were no longer the masters. Humanity had broken their chains. Elara turned to the others, her crew, her family. They had made it through the trials, survived the darkness within and without, and now they stood at the threshold of something vast, something unknown. We've chosen, she said softly. Now, it's time to build our own future. And as they stepped into that vast, untamed expanse, the stars themselves seemed to watch, waiting to see what humanity would do with their newfound freedom. The architects had created the conditions for this moment, but it was humanity that would shape what came next. And so, the story of humanity truly began, no longer a part of someone else's grand experiment, but the architects of their own destiny.